The cake was still on the counter when Vivian Russell heard the front door open. She didn't turn around right away. She finished lighting the last candle first, 12 of them, one for every year of their marriage. Bob. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. She'd practiced it in the mirror 3 times while she was getting dressed the same way she'd practiced not showing the pain from her medication. The cardiologist had told her last Tuesday that her heart was operating at 40% capacity. He'd used the word deteriorating. He'd used the phrase reduced timeline. She hadn't told Bob. She kept telling herself there was a right moment. There wasn't a right moment. She understood that now. "You're home early," Bob Russell said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his phone. He was always looking at his phone now. "It's our anniversary," Vivian said. She gestured at the table, 12 candles, his favorite meal, the wine they'd opened on their wedding night. "I cooked. I thought we could." Vivian. He said her name the way you say a word you've said too many times. Flat. Automatic. "I have a dinner. An important one." "You have a dinner?" "Yes. On our anniversary." He finally looked up, and there it was, that flicker of irritation she'd been seeing for 2 years now, that slight tightening around his eyes that said, "Why are you making this difficult?" "It's a business dinner," he said. "The Hargrove account. You know how important." "I called your office today," Vivian said quietly. A pause. Short. Almost imperceptible. "They said you left at 2. He set his phone face down on the counter. That was new. He never used to do that. "I had to stop somewhere first." "Where?" "Vivian." "Bob." Her voice didn't waver. She was still proud of that. "Where did you stop?" He straightened his cuffs. He'd changed suits since this morning. She noticed that too. Fresh shirt. A tie she didn't recognize. And something else, something faint that she'd been trying not to name for months now. A perfume that wasn't hers. "I'm not doing this tonight," he said. "We can talk tomorrow. We said that last week and the week before. And I mean it this time. Tomorrow, Vivian. I'll be back by 11. She looked at the candles. All 12 of them. Burning. "Who is she?" Vivian asked. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. She counted. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The perfume on your collar." Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "It's not mine. I don't own anything by that brand. It's—" She stopped, swallowed. "It's expensive. Someone bought it for themselves." I hugged Margaret Chen at the office. She always wears strong. "Don't," Vivian said. "Vivian, please don't." She pressed her hand flat against the counter. Her heart was doing that thing again, that stuttering flutter the doctors kept measuring. She focused on breathing. Steady. In, out. "Just tell me the truth." After 12 years. "Just once. Tell me the truth." He picked up his phone. "I'll be back by 11, he said. The door closed behind him at 7:04 p.m. Vivian sat down at the table alone. She didn't eat. She watched the candles burn down one by one until the wax ran onto the tablecloth she'd pressed that afternoon. She stayed like that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called her cardiologist. "I need to reschedule my procedure," she said. "I'm not ready yet. There are still some things I need to arrange. If you want to see what happens next, like this video and subscribe." Her name was Jasmine B. Morgan. Vivian found out 3 days after the anniversary. Not because Bob told her. He would never have told her. He was too good at maintenance, at keeping the surface smooth enough to reflect whatever version of the marriage he needed people to see. She found out because of the dry cleaning. Bob's jacket, left pocket, a receipt from Étoile, the rooftop restaurant downtown, the kind of place Bob used to take Vivian when they were first married and he still wanted to impress her. Table for 2. A wine that cost $800. The kind of evening you plan, not stumble into. She'd stood in the laundry room for 20 minutes holding that receipt. Then she'd done what she'd been refusing to do for months. She hired someone. The investigator's name was Carter. He was a small, quiet man who smelled like coffee and kept his reports in manila envelopes. He called her 4 days later. "Mrs. Russell, I have what you asked for." "How long?" she asked. She meant, "How long has it been going on?" "The documented evidence goes back 11 months, Carter said carefully. "But I believe it started before that." 11 months. Vivian sat down on the edge of the bed, their bed, hers and Bob's, and pressed her palm to her sternum. Not from sadness, from reflex. Her heart had been doing strange things lately, stuttering at the wrong moments. "I'll email you the file," Carter said. She opened it that night when Bob was in the shower. Jasmine B. Morgan, 29 years old, former marketing associate at Russell Enterprises, Bob's own company. She'd left 6 months ago. Listed as resigned voluntarily. Vivian understood now why it had been voluntary. The photographs were worse than she'd prepared for. Not because they were explicit. They weren't. Carter was professional. But they were intimate in a way that was somehow more devastating than explicit would have been. A photograph of Bob laughing, really laughing, the way he used to laugh with Vivian in the early years. A photograph of his hand at the small of Jasmine's back. A photograph of them walking into an apartment building that Vivian didn't recognize. She scrolled to the address. She knew that building. She owned that building. Or rather, the company she'd quietly built while Bob was busy climbing did. The company no one knew about yet. The one whose shares she'd been accumulating in her own name while Bob ran Russell Enterprises on the infrastructure she'd designed, the contacts she'd cultivated, the capital she'd quietly redirected. Jasmine Morgan was living in Vivian's building. The irony was so sharp it almost felt like a joke. Almost. She didn't confront Bob that night. Or the next night. She was still deciding what she wanted. Not emotionally. Emotionally, she'd already decided. She'd decided standing in the laundry room, holding that restaurant receipt. But strategically, she needed more time. Because Vivian had learned something. In 12 years of being Bob Russell's wife, in 12 years of being underestimated and overlooked and quietly essential, the person who moves first loses. So she waited, and she watched, and she listened to the phone calls he thought she couldn't hear through the study wall. "She's paranoid," she heard him say one evening. His voice was soft, careful. The voice he used when he was managing a situation. "She's always been like this, anxious, reading into things. You know how she gets." A pause while the other person spoke. "I know," he said. "I know. I'm handling it." A different evening, a different fragment. "She hired someone, a PI or whatever. I know. But look, nothing she finds changes anything. The business is in my name. The accounts are in my name." She signed the prenup. Another pause. Then, softer. "She's not well. Physically. The heart thing. It makes her emotional. Erratic. If she tries to make trouble, no one's going to side with a woman who can't." He dropped his voice. She lost the rest. She stood very still against the study wall. No one's going to side with a woman who can't. Who can't what? Who can't hold herself together? Who can't be trusted? Who can't be believed? She understood the architecture now, completely. He had been building it for months, this quiet, careful construction of a version of her that would preemptively discredit anything she said. Fragile, anxious, emotional, sick. He was laying the groundwork so that when she eventually confronted him, the people who mattered would look at her and think, "Well, she's not well, you know. It's the heart condition. It makes her see things." Anxious. That was the word he used. Vivian had given up a partnership at Mercer and Hall to marry this man. A full partnership, her name on the door, equity stake, the culmination of 7 years of 80-hour weeks. Bob had been a client then. He'd sat across from her in the conference room and said, "You're the only person in this firm who actually understands what I'm trying to build. He'd meant it as a compliment. She'd understood, looking back, that he'd meant it as an identification. He'd spotted something in her and wanted to use it. She had organized every dinner party, every board retreat, every social connection that had elevated Bob Russell from a mid-level developer to a name people recognized. She had done it quietly because he'd asked her to. "Let me take the credit, Viv. It's easier. You know how these old boys are." She'd run board meetings and pretended they were his ideas. She'd cultivated relationships with senior partners at 3 law firms, 2 investment banks, and a development authority. And every time she made the introduction, Bob stood at the center and she stood slightly to the side. She'd believed this was partnership. She'd been very, very naive. The week before the gala, there was a dinner party at the Marshes' home. Vivian almost didn't go. She was tired, the medication schedule was relentless, and her energy had a ceiling these days that she kept bumping against. But she knew if she stayed home, Bob would go alone, and she'd been alone enough lately. She wore the dove gray dress. She did her hair. She took her medication at 6. She sat at the dinner table between Eleanor Hartfield and a man named Prescott, who ran a hedge fund and wanted to talk about property markets. And she was perfectly composed, and she listened, and she contributed at the right moments, and no one looking at her would have known she was a woman whose husband was watching her from across the table with the careful eyes of a man calculating exactly how much of a problem she was going to be. It was after dessert that it happened. The women had drifted toward the sitting room. One of the younger wives, Prescott's wife, Catherine, who was bright and kind and new to all of this, asked Vivian how Bob was doing. "He seems different lately," she said, a little distracted. Before Vivian could answer, Margaret Chen, who sat on 2 charity boards with Bob, who called Bob by his first name, who had apparently become something of an emissary, said smoothly, "Bob's under a lot of pressure. The Linden contract, the Q4 projections, and of course, a delicate pause. Things at home have been difficult." Catherine looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Margaret. "Have they?" Vivian said. "He doesn't say much," Margaret said, with the particular tone of someone conveying precisely how much they know. "He's very private, very protective." She smoothed her skirt. "He's just worried. About you. He mentioned you've been struggling." "Did he?" "The health things," Margaret said. Sympathetically. "It must be so hard. It affects everything, doesn't it? Your mood, your perception. I had an aunt with a heart condition, and she became so—" She stopped herself, smiled. "Well, I'm sure you're managing beautifully." The room was quiet in the particular way rooms become quiet when everyone has heard something they're all pretending not to have heard. Your perception. Vivian picked up her coffee cup. "I'm managing very well," she said pleasantly. "Thank you, Margaret." She smiled until her face hurt. She did not look at Bob for the rest of the evening. In the car going home, she stared out the window and thought, 11 months documented. 14 months total. And in that time, he has told enough people, enough things, that they are already seeing me through his lens. She thought about that for a long time. She thought, he thinks I have nothing. He thinks I am nothing. He thinks the sick, anxious, paranoid wife he's been describing is the whole story. And she thought, let him keep thinking that. The public humiliation came in the second week. It started at the Hartfield Charity Gala, the annual fundraiser where all of Bob's business circle gathered in black tie and congratulated each other on their own generosity. Vivian attended in a midnight blue gown and the pearl earrings Bob had given her on their 5th anniversary. She'd taken her medication at 6 o'clock. She'd paced her energy carefully. Her cardiologist had told her to avoid stress, large crowds, and prolonged standing. She did all 3. She was talking with Eleanor Hartfield near the silent auction tables when she saw them, Bob and Jasmine, together, in the same room, at the same event. Vivian didn't move. She kept her expression completely still. She'd had 12 years of practice keeping her expression completely still. Jasmine Morgan was exactly what the photographs had suggested, beautiful in the aggressive, deliberate way that demanded attention. She wore a red dress that had clearly been chosen to be noticed. She stood just close enough to Bob that the message was legible without being undeniable. Vivian. Eleanor touched her arm. Are you all right? You've gone quite pale. I'm fine, Vivian said. I just need a moment. She excused herself and walked, slowly, steadily, to the powder room. She gripped the edge of the sink. In the mirror, her own face looked back at her, thinner than it had been last year, the shadows under her eyes a little deeper. The medications did that. The condition did that. She'd been hiding it well. She heard the door open behind her. She expected Eleanor. Or one of the other wives. It was Jasmine. Vivian watched her in the mirror without turning around. Jasmine met her eyes in the reflection, and then, and this was the part Vivian would remember for a very long time, Jasmine smiled. Not maliciously, exactly. More like a woman who has already decided the outcome of something and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. Mrs. Russell, she said, I've wanted to meet you properly. Have you? Bob talks about you. She went to the mirror beside Vivian and touched her lipstick. Perfectly casual. He worries about you. The health things. She tilted her head. He didn't tell me the specifics. He's very protective of your privacy. Vivian said nothing. He just says you've had a hard year, Jasmine continued. That you haven't been yourself. That the stress has been. She paused. Chose the word carefully. Difficult for you. There it is, Vivian thought. The character being built for me. The fragile wife. The anxious woman. The one who reads into things. How kind of him, Vivian said, her voice perfectly level. He really does care about you, Jasmine said. She snapped her clutch closed, met Vivian's eyes in the mirror one more time. He just doesn't know how to reach you anymore. He told me that he's tried, that you've become. Another careful pause. Distant. She left. Vivian stood at the sink for another 60 seconds. Then she walked back out into the gala, found Bob across the room, and said quietly in his ear, We need to talk tonight. Not here, he said. At home then. He didn't look at her. He was watching something across the room. She didn't need to follow his gaze to know what. Fine, he said. At home. He didn't come home that night. She called his phone at 11, at midnight, at 1 in the morning. He finally picked up at 1:47 a.m. Where are you? She asked. I'm at the office. His voice was slightly blurred. Not drunk. Bob never got drunk. But relaxed in a way he wasn't when he was actually at the office. The office, she repeated. There was an issue with the Linden contract, I told you. Bob, come home. I'll be there by morning. Come home now. A silence. And then something shifted in his voice, from managed to impatient. Vivian, I need you to stop doing this. Doing what? This, the calls, the surveillance, showing up places and watching me. His voice was harder now. It's embarrassing. Margaret mentioned to me that you asked about my schedule. Do you understand how that looks? How it looks? Yes, how it looks. You're making people uncomfortable. You're making me uncomfortable. I've been trying to be patient because I know you've had a difficult year with the health things, but I need you to understand that this behavior... Bob, her voice cut clean through his. I hired someone. Another silence. Longer. I have photographs, she said. I have receipts. I have 11 months of documented evidence. She paused. Let that settle. Come home. The line went quiet for a long time. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. He was there in 20. She was sitting in the living room when he walked in. No lights except the lamp by the couch. She'd chosen the seat deliberately, the one that put her facing the door. Him in the light. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, How much do you want? Vivian blinked. I beg your pardon? To keep this quiet. He was already moving, already managing. I know how these things go. You want a number. I'm willing to be reasonable. We can. Sit down, she said. Something in her voice stopped him. He sat. I don't want your money, she said. I have my own. She watched his face. More than you know, actually. We can get to that later. What do you want? Right now? I want you to look me in the face and tell me the truth. She held his gaze. How long? Vivian. How long, Bob? He looked at the floor. Then, 14 months. 3 more than Carter had documented. Do you love her? He didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. And the things you've told her about me, Vivian said. That I'm paranoid, anxious, difficult, distant. She watched him. Did you believe them when you said them? Or were they just useful? Contrast. He had the grace, at least, to look uncomfortable. I was trying to explain, you were building a story, she said quietly. A story where I'm the problem. Where leaving me isn't abandonment, it's escape. Where she isn't the other woman, she's the solution. That's not. Don't. She stood up. I'm going to bed. You can sleep in the guest room. Vivian, we need to. There's nothing to discuss tonight. She moved toward the stairs, then stopped. One more thing. I know about the apartment. He stiffened. The one on Calloway Street, she said. The building where she lives. She looked back at him over her shoulder. I own that building, Bob. I own the land it's on. I've owned it for 3 years. She held his gaze for one long moment. Good night. Good night. She should have known it was coming. There had been signs. The way Bob's demeanor shifted after that night, from managed to cold. The whispered calls she caught fragments of. She knows. I don't know what she knows. We need to be careful. She should have known that a man who had been building a story for 14 months wouldn't stop building it just because she'd seen through it. She was in her room when she heard them. Not just Bob. Voices. Plural. She opened her bedroom door. Bob stood in the hallway with his phone raised, filming, and beside him, standing in Vivian's home, in Vivian's hallway, wearing a coat Vivian had never seen her wear before, was Jasmine Morgan. Vivian stared at her. Jasmine stared back. And then her face did something extraordinary. It crumpled. Not authentically. Vivian had seen authentic crumbling. This was performed, precisely calibrated. Tears, arriving right on cue. I'm so sorry, Jasmine whispered. I never meant for any of this to hurt you. Why is she in my house? Vivian said. Vivian Bob started. Why is she in my house? She came to me tonight, Bob said. His voice was urgent, pressured. She's in trouble. She needed somewhere to go. I couldn't leave her. You brought your mistress into our home. Vivian's voice was very quiet. Tonight. Tonight. She's not. It's complicated. She's been having chest pains, Bob said. She needs rest. She can't be alone. Vivian looked at Jasmine, at the perfectly calibrated distress, at the hand pressed theatrically to her sternum. Something ugly moved through her. Chest pains, Vivian said. She had a cardiologist. She had a heart operating at 40% capacity. She had medications she took at 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. and hadn't missed a single dose in 8 months because missing doses had consequences she couldn't afford. How convenient. She's not lying, Bob started. Get her out of my house. Vivian, just listen. Get her out of my house. Bob's expression changed. She saw the moment it changed. The shift from managing to something harder, the face of a man who has been caught and has decided that the best defense is offense. You're making a scene, he said. I'm making a scene. Yes, you're being hysterical. The word hit her like cold water. Hysterical, from the Greek, hystera, womb, a condition attributed to women for centuries as a way of making their reasonable responses to unreasonable situations sound like medical problems. She had a medical problem, a real one, and this man stood in her hallway with his mistress and called her hysterical. "Get out," she said. "Both of you, get out of this house." "Vivian, I live here." "So do I, and I'm asking you to leave." She kept her voice very level. "I will be contacting my attorney in the morning. Tonight, I need you both out." Bob looked at Jasmine. Some communication passed between them. She saw it. A decision made. "Vivian," Bob said. His voice dropped. Soft now, concerned. The voice he used at business dinners when he wanted people to see a reasonable man. "I'm worried about you. The stress, the health. You're not making good decisions right now. You need to calm down and think clearly. I am thinking very clearly." No, I don't think you are." He stepped toward her, reached for her arm. "Come on, let's get some air. Let's just—" She jerked away. "Don't touch me. You need some air. I said don't." He took her arm, not roughly, that would have been too obvious, too legible. He took it the way a husband who is concerned about his wife takes her arm, firmly, inexorably, moving her toward the stairs. She tried to pull free. "You're upset," he said. "You need to calm down before you do something you regret. Jasmine will stay in the guest room tonight. She's not well. You're not well. In the morning, we'll all be clearer." "Bob, you're trembling," he said, almost gently. "When did you last take your medication?" That stopped her. He knew. He'd always known she was sick. She thought she was protecting him from the weight of it. But he'd known, and now he was using it as a frame. The sick wife. The unstable one. The one who reads into things. She was at the top of the stairs now. She didn't entirely remember how. "Fresh air," he said. "It'll help. Come outside for a minute." She understood. A moment too late. What was happening? The front door was open. She was outside before she fully registered it. And then the door closed. She stood on the front steps of their mansion and heard the lock click. She turned, put her hand on the door. It didn't move. "Bob," she knocked. "Bob, open the door." Silence from inside. She knocked harder. "Bob." The rain had started while they were arguing. She hadn't noticed. She noticed now. It was the kind of autumn rain that comes in cold and fast, not dramatic, no thunder, just steady sheets of cold that soaked through fabric in under a minute. She was wearing her house clothes, a thin cardigan, socks, no coat, no phone, no medication. She knocked again. "Bob, please, it's cold. I don't have my Bob. I need my medication. Please open the door." Silence. She could see the light through the downstairs windows. She could see the shadows moving inside. She could see them in there. She pressed her back against the door and slid down until she was sitting on the cold, wet stone of the front step. Her heart was doing that stuttering thing again, the thing that scared her, the thing the doctors monitored with machines. She pressed her palm to her chest. "Okay," she said, very quietly, to herself. "Okay." She didn't cry. She'd made a decision a long time ago, maybe standing in that laundry room, maybe earlier, that she wasn't going to cry for him anymore. She'd allocated a fixed number of tears to Bob Russell, and she'd spent them all. She sat in the rain. For 11 minutes. She counted. She counted partly to stay anchored, partly because the rhythm helped, partly because she needed to know exactly how long she had been out here, how long he had left her. 11 minutes. Then she stood up. She was soaking. Her cardigan was heavy with water. Her feet were numb in their wet socks. Her heart was doing something she could feel but couldn't control. She walked around the side of the house to the garden gate. She knew the code. It was the code to Bob's old apartment, the one they'd lived in when they were first married. She'd suggested it years ago. He'd never changed it. She let herself in, used the spare key under the garden stone, let herself through the back entrance. She went upstairs. She took her medication. She changed into dry clothes. She packed one bag, not her whole life, not everything, Just one bag, the things that mattered. The things that couldn't be replaced. Her mother's ring, the flash drive, the documents, the medication. She called a car. She didn't leave a note. She called her attorney at 7 a.m. She called Carter at 7:15. She called the cardiologist at 7:30. She did not call Bob. He called her at 8:02. She watched his name light up on the screen and did not answer. She watched it light up 3 more times over the next hour. Each time, she did not answer. At 9:14, he sent a text message. "We should talk. You overreacted last night. Jasmine is gone. We can work through this." She took a screenshot and sent it to her attorney. Then she blocked his number and went to her first meeting of the day. Here is what Bob Russell didn't know. He didn't know that Vivian had been slowly, methodically, quietly building for the last 3 years. He didn't know that the investment hobby she'd mentioned in passing, the thing he'd nodded at without listening to, because Bob Russell had never listened to Vivian with his full attention, had become something else entirely. He didn't know that Vivian Russell, née Calloway, was the silent majority shareholder of Calloway Group, a privately held real estate and infrastructure firm that had, in the last 18 months, acquired 11 properties across the city. He didn't know that 3 of those properties were buildings Russell Enterprises leased for its regional offices. He didn't know that the land his flagship headquarters sat on the tower with his name on it, the one he pointed to from car windows when he wanted people to understand who he was owned by a company whose ownership he had never investigated because he had never thought to ask. He didn't know that the woman he had locked out in the rain was the reason his company existed. Not the public reason, not the biography he gave at conference keynotes, the scrappy builder who made its story he'd refined over years into something smooth and compelling. That story was real as far as it went. He had worked, he had been talented, he had made decisions, but the foundation those decisions rested on the capital that had let him make his first acquisition, the network that had opened the doors he'd walked through, the quiet redirections of opportunity that had pointed his path consistently upward. That was Vivian. She'd done it because she loved him. She'd done it so carefully, so quietly, so completely in his shadow that he had never once suspected. She'd done it for 12 years, and then she stopped. The first thing Bob noticed was the lease renewal. Russell Enterprises' regional offices had leases up in November. He'd expected automatic renewal. They'd been in those buildings for years. His real estate team sent the notices in October, as usual. The response came from Calloway Group's legal department. "Dear Mr. Russell, please be advised that Calloway Group will not be renewing the above-referenced leases. Tenants are required to vacate by December 1st. Please direct all inquiries to..." Bob stared at the letter. "Who is Calloway Group?" he asked his assistant. She looked it up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "Sir, the registered agent is V. Calloway Russell." He made her repeat it. Then he told her to get out of his office. He sat alone for a long time. He called Vivian. She didn't answer. She hadn't answered in 3 weeks. He called her attorney, who told him, pleasantly, that all communications should be directed through proper legal channels. He went home. To the house that wasn't home anymore, she'd file the paperwork. The divorce proceedings were formal now. He was the one in the guest room of his own life. He sat in the kitchen and thought about the building on Calloway Street, the one she'd mentioned the night he locked her out. "I own that building, Bob." He thought she was bluffing, a wounded woman reaching for something that sounded like power. He hadn't been listening. He never had been. The board meeting was in November. Bob sat at the head of the table and looked at faces he didn't fully recognize his own board, the people who were supposed to be his, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like he didn't know the room. The presentation was from the Strategic Review Committee. It outlined Russell Enterprises' 3 greatest vulnerabilities. All 3 involved Calloway Group. The ownership question is significant, the committee chair said carefully. If Callaway Group proceeds with the non-renewal, we're looking at logistical displacement costs of— Who authorized this review? Bob asked. A pause. The board requested it. The board. He looked around the table. When? 3 weeks ago. He hadn't been informed. He understood with a slowness that felt like waking up that this was intentional. And who, he said carefully, is the principal at Callaway Group? Who are we actually dealing with here? The committee chair glanced at Gerald Marsh. Gerald didn't look away from Bob. The registered principal, the chair said, is a V. Callaway. She's done an effective job maintaining the company's private profile. We only identified her because— he paused. Because she chose to make herself known. To us specifically. Last month. She contacted the board, Bob said. She offered a presentation, Gerald said. We accepted. Bob looked at his longest-serving board member, a man who had attended his wedding, who had shaken his hand at every milestone, who had known Bob since he was 32 years old and hungry and building something from nothing, and tried to read his face. He couldn't. That was new. What did she present? Bob asked. Gerald said, everything. The silence in the boardroom lasted 4 seconds. Bob counted. Meaning what? He said. Meaning the full picture, Gerald said. The capital structure, the network, the history of contributions, documented, dated, sourced. He paused. Bob, did you know? Know what? How much of what you've built depended on decisions she made, resources she provided, connections she engineered. Gerald folded his hands on the table. Did you know? The room was very quiet. Bob looked at the table, at his own hands on it. Some of it, he said. Finally, some of it. She handled a lot of the she was involved in the early. He stopped, started again. She was useful in the beginning, before the company was what it is now. Before it was what it is now, Gerald repeated, with the careful voice of a man testing whether the person he's talking to can hear himself. Bob couldn't. Not fully, not yet. The board will be discussing options, Gerald said. The Callaway Group situation is significant. We need to make decisions about the lease situation, the broader exposure. I'll handle the Callaway Group situation, Bob said. How? I'll talk to her. The silence that followed was the kind that contains a great deal of unsaid things. Bob, Gerald said quietly. She sat in front of this board for 2 hours. She presented documentation that most executives spend careers accumulating. She was articulate, composed, and very clear about her intentions. He paused. She is not interested in talking to you. She's my wife. She's filing for divorce. Gerald's voice was gentle, not unkind. The voice of a man who is saying something that needs to be said. And she is far more formidable than you apparently understood her to be. Bob stared at him. The board will be in touch, Gerald said. He closed his folder, stood. I'd suggest you spend the weekend thinking carefully about next steps. And he paused at the door. Call your attorney, not hers, yours. Later, in the hallway, Gerald put a hand on his shoulder and said, quietly, Bob, you should call your wife. She won't talk to me. I know. Gerald paused. She talked to us. What Vivian had told the board, through her attorney, through carefully documented evidence, through the paper trail she'd been building for 3 years, was the full picture. Not a vindictive picture, not a scorched earth performance. Just the truth, documented and irrefutable. The history of her contributions to Russell Enterprises, the structure of her holding company, the leases and the land and the capital, and what she intended to do with all of it. She had not asked for anything from the board. She had simply informed them. The board had done the rest themselves. Jasmine Morgan's downfall came quietly and then all at once. It started with an anonymous tip to a financial journalist, a tip about Callaway Group that led, naturally, to questions about Russell Enterprises which led to questions about certain communications that had been made between Jasmine Morgan, as a former Russell Enterprises employee, and a competitor firm. Carter had found the communications. Vivian had given them to her attorney. Her attorney had known exactly who to give them to. Jasmine had not resigned from Russell Enterprises voluntarily. She had been quietly asked to leave after certain files were found on her personal laptop during an IT review. The matter had been buried to avoid the scandal. Bob had buried it because he was protecting her, and because he had not understood, at the time, that what she'd taken wasn't just data. It was the blueprint, the internal architecture of Russell Enterprises' strategic plans for the next 5 years. The kind of document that, in the hands of a competitor, was worth considerably more than any salary. And then there was the other thing, the thing that Vivian had discovered not through Carter, but through a conversation with Bob's personal accountant, a quiet, meticulous man named Harold, who had served the company for 18 years and who had, it turned out, been increasingly uncomfortable. Jasmine had not only taken the blueprints. She had been feeding financial projections, quarterly forecasts, acquisition targets, negotiating positions to the competitor firm for 7 months, while she was still employed by Russell Enterprises. While Bob was protecting her, covering for her, installing her in a building he didn't know his wife owned, while he was calling Vivian paranoid and anxious and difficult, while he was locking his wife outside in the rain, he had been betrayed by the woman he'd chosen over the woman who built him. The journalist published on a Thursday. The article was measured, heavily sourced, and devastating. By Friday morning, Jasmine's name was in every business publication that mattered. By Friday noon, she had deleted her social media. By Friday afternoon, Bob had received a call from the competitor firm's legal team, threatening counter-litigation. They claimed they hadn't known the information was proprietary, that they were also victims, that Jasmine had misrepresented her authority to share it. Bob's attorney called him 5 times in 3 hours. By Friday evening, Bob was sitting in his car outside the office, staring at the lit tower with his name on it, and thinking about a woman in a red dress at a charity gala who had pressed her hand to her chest and looked pitiful, and thinking about another woman who had pressed her hand to her chest while sitting in the rain outside a locked door and not cried once. He had chosen the performance over the real thing. He had chosen the woman who played the victim over the woman who was won. He sat there for a long time. He thought about Vivian standing in the rain. He thought about her voice, "I need my medication," muffled through the door he'd locked. He thought about the moment he decided she was the problem instead of the solution. The decision that had felt, at the time, so simple, so obvious. She was difficult. She was anxious. She was sick and getting sicker. And Jasmine was young and easy, and wanted him in the uncomplicated, uncritical way that feels, to a man of a certain ego, like oxygen. He'd chosen oxygen. He hadn't understood that the woman he was suffocating was the one keeping his world alive. "I need to see you. Please. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm sorry." He stared at it for a long time. He sent it. The reply came from her attorney's office the following morning. "Mrs. Russell has received your message. She asks that you direct all further communication through proper legal channels. She also asked us to convey the following, and she was very specific about the wording. The time to be sorry was when I was sitting outside in the rain. The procedure was in December. It went well, better than the cardiologist had expected. He used words like stabilizing and encouraging. He told her that the early intervention had made a significant difference, that the timeline he'd been concerned about had, perhaps, shifted. Vivian listened and nodded, and afterwards sat in the car with her driver and looked out the window at the winter city. She thought about a woman who had given 12 years to being invisible, who had built an empire in the margins of another person's life, who had been called paranoid and anxious and hysterical and difficult while she was quietly, methodically building the foundation that man stood on. She thought about 11 minutes in the rain. She thought, never again. The offices of Callaway Group occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a building that Vivian owned. Her name was on the door now. Not V. Callaway Russell, just Vivian Callaway. She'd gone back to her name. She'd gone back to herself. The offices were nothing like what she'd had in mind when she was 31, accepting a partnership at Mercer and Hall before she gave it up for love. She'd imagined, back then, that her career was something she was pausing, a sabbatical, a resting. She'd come back to it, she'd told herself, when things were more settled, when Bob was more established, when the timing was right. There was never a right time. She understood that now. But the offices were better than anything she'd imagined at 31, because she wasn't building someone else's vision anymore. Every decision in these rooms, the layout, the culture, the clients, the terms, was hers. Nobody was asking her to stand slightly to the left. She had a small team, 12 people, all of them people she'd chosen specifically. People who understood the kind of company she was building. Quiet, powerful, uninterested in credit. Uninterested in credit. She'd put that in the job listings, and her head of HR had told her it was unusual. She'd said, it'll attract the right people. It had. She had a meeting at 10 with the Hargrove Group, the same account Bob had cited as an excuse on their anniversary night. It turned out the Hargrove Group had been trying to reach Russell Enterprises for weeks and finding no one coherent to speak to. The company was distracted, in restructuring, its leadership fractured. A mutual contact had mentioned Callaway Group. She'd taken the meeting. She would probably take the account. Her assistant knocked at 9:50. Mrs. Callaway? The Hargrove team is here. Give me 2 minutes, Vivian said. She stood at the window, looked out at the city, at the tower with Bob's name on it, at the buildings around it, 3 of which were hers. She thought about the woman she'd been, the one who'd lit 12 candles and practiced her voice in the mirror, and hoped, still, after everything, that he'd come home. She felt something for that woman, something warm and a little sad. She had carried so much for so long, and she had carried it quietly, and she had carried it even when the carrying was making her sick, even when her heart was stuttering with the weight of it. She had kept his secrets and subsidized his success and absorbed his narrative about her own inadequacies, and she had done all of it because she loved him, and because love, the kind she'd believed in, meant giving without accounting. She didn't believe in that kind of love anymore. She believed in something that looked more like partnership, genuine partnership, the kind where both people are in the light, where both names are on the door, where neither person has to stand slightly to the left. She hadn't found that yet. She wasn't looking for it yet. She was still learning what it felt like to stand in the center. But she was not going back. That much she knew. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her coffee. She walked to the door. Bob Russell's year-end was the worst in the company's history. He hired 3 consultants. He replaced 2 board members. He announced a strategic restructuring. None of it touched the real problem, which was that the architecture of his success had always depended on something he'd never acknowledged and had now lost. He called her that Friday night from the parking lot. She didn't answer. He called again. Nothing. He wrote a text message, deleted it, wrote another, deleted that too, wrote a third, and stared at it for 11 minutes, the same amount of time she'd sat outside in the rain before sending it. I need to see you, please. I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you were to me, what you built. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm sorry. The reply came the following morning from her attorney's office. Mrs. Russell has received your message. She asks that you direct all further communication through proper legal channels. She also asked us to convey the following, and she was very specific about the wording. The time to be sorry was when I was sitting outside in the rain. Bob read it 3 times. Then He put his phone down on his desk and sat very still. He thought about the lock clicking. He thought about the light through the windows. He and Jasmine, inside, in the warm. He'd told himself Vivian needed air. He'd told himself she was being irrational, emotional, and that removing her from the situation was the reasonable thing, the caring thing, even. He'd told himself a lot of things in the seconds before the lock clicked. He understood now that he had known, even then, that none of those things were true. He had locked her out because she was inconvenient. He had left her in the rain because she was in his way. He had let himself believe the story about the anxious wife, the paranoid woman, the sick woman who read into things because that story was more comfortable than the truth, which was that the woman sitting in the rain was the smartest person he had ever known, and he had spent 12 years trying not to let her know he knew it. He still called sometimes. She still didn't answer. He was seen, once, at the restaurant, where he used to take Vivian on anniversaries, sitting alone, nursing a drink, staring at his phone. A business reporter who happened to be dining there mentioned it in a column. The tycoon who built an empire and lost it room by room. Jasmine Morgan relocated to the East Coast. She did not face criminal charges, not yet. That was still pending. But her name was known now, in ways she hadn't intended, and the industry was small. The piece she'd bought with someone else's life had a very short warranty. On a Thursday in February, Vivian Calloway had lunch with Eleanor Hartfield, the woman who'd touched her arm at the gala, and asked if she was all right. They sat at a corner table at a restaurant that neither of them had been to with their husbands. That had been Eleanor's suggestion. "Somewhere new," she'd said. "Somewhere that's just ours." Vivian had appreciated that more than she'd been able to say. "You look different," Eleanor said, studying her. "Do I?" "Healthier. But not just physically." She tilted her head. "Lighter." Vivian thought about it. "I've been sleeping better," she said. "Because of the heart?" "Partly." She looked out the restaurant window at the February sky, flat and white and certain. "Partly because I stopped carrying things that weren't mine to carry." Eleanor nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment, arranging something in her mind. "He called me, you know," she said finally. "Bob. About a month ago." Vivian raised her eyebrows. "He wanted to know if you'd spoken about him, to anyone, what you'd said." Eleanor's mouth tightened slightly. "I told him I wasn't going to answer that." "What else did he say?" "He asked me if I thought you'd ever consider." Eleanor stopped, shook her head. "Reconciliation" was the word he used, which I found interesting. Interesting. Because the last time I'd seen him at the gala, he was standing 20 feet from his mistress and speaking about your mental health to Margaret Chen. Eleanor set down her glass. "He didn't use the word reconciliation then." "No," Vivian said. "He wouldn't have. I told him he'd asked the wrong question." "What's the right question?" "Whether you'd ever consider it." Eleanor picked up her coffee. "And I told him, I don't think she needs to. I told him that I had watched you sit in your marriage like someone sitting in a room that's slowly losing oxygen and never once complain about the air. I told him that women like you don't recover and then go back. They recover and then they go forward." She held Vivian's gaze. "I don't think he understood what I meant." Vivian looked at her. She felt something that wasn't quite a smile but was close. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as relief and recognition, the feeling of being seen, fully, without the frame someone else had built around you. "You're right," she said. "I don't." She picked up her own cup, looked out the window again. The February sky had shifted slightly, not warmer, but different, brighter, maybe. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For asking if I was all right. At the gala." She looked at Eleanor. "You were the only one who did." Eleanor was quiet. Everyone else had already decided what the story was, Vivian said. The fragile wife, the anxious one, I could see it in how they looked at me like they were reading a caption someone had written underneath my face. She paused. You just looked at me. Like a person. You were a person, Eleanor said simply. You still are. I know, Vivian said. And she did. That was the thing that Bob had never understood, had perhaps never been capable of understanding. He'd looked at Vivian and seen something to manage, something to contain or explain or reframe. He'd never simply looked at her. She had spent 12 years trying to be fully visible to a man who had decided very early exactly how much of her he wanted to see. She was done trying to be seen by the wrong people. She was simply going to be. She didn't hate him. That was perhaps the most surprising thing, that hatred had never arrived. She'd expected it, had steeled herself for it. But what came instead was something quieter and stranger, and, in its way, more complete. Clarity. She saw him clearly now. Not the man she'd imagined he was in the first years. Not the villain she'd needed him to be in the worst ones. Just a man limited, frightened, unwilling to look at what he couldn't control, reaching always for the version of events that required the least from him. She had loved him once. She had built empires for him once. She was done. And being done felt like standing in sunlight after 11 minutes in the rain, cold still, in the bones, in the memory, but warm now, getting warmer. Some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. Some women, once awake, cannot be put back to sleep. Vivian Calloway had been asleep for 12 years. She was not going back. Did Vivian get the justice she deserved? Comment Calloway Queen if you think she won. Like and follow for more stories that hit different.